Picture this, it's the dead of night, August 8th, 1963. A mail train is hurtling through the English countryside on its way from Glasgow to London. On board, in a special carriage, are millions of pounds in used banknotes. But this isn't just any night. This is the night of what will become the most audacious and infamous heist in British history, the Great Train Robbery. So how did a gang of 15 men pull off such a daring crime, and what ultimately led to their downfall? Let's dive into the incredible true story. The whole operation was the brainchild of a man named Bruce Reynolds. He wasn't your average petty thief. Reynolds was a charismatic career criminal with a taste for the high life and a flair for planning. He brought together a team of specialists from two major London gangs, the best safecrackers, drivers, and muscle he could find. But even with the perfect team, they needed one crucial thing: inside information. This came from a mysterious figure known only as the Ulsterman. We now know him as Patrick McKenna, a postal worker who provided the gang with the holy grail of intel. The exact train schedules, the route, and most importantly, which carriage the high-value package or HVP carriage was carrying the cash. He told them that after a bank holiday weekend in Scotland, the train would be carrying an unusually large amount of money, potentially up to £3 million. With the plan in motion, the gang needed a base of operations. They bought Leatherslade Farm, a remote property in Buckinghamshire, just 15 miles from the planned ambush site. It was the perfect secluded spot to finalize their plans and, more importantly, to lay low and divide the loot after the job was done. As the date approached, everything was meticulously planned. The gang was ready. At around 3 o'clock in the morning on August 8th, the plan swung into action. The gang made their way to a lonely stretch of track called Sears Crossing. Their method for stopping the train was brilliantly simple. They took a leather glove and covered the green signal light. Then, using a simple 6-volt battery, they powered up the red signal light, creating a fake stop signal. The Royal Mail train, an enormous locomotive with 12 carriages, chugged into view. The driver, 57-year-old Jack Mills, saw the red light and did exactly what he was supposed to do. He brought the massive train to a halt. His co-driver, David Whitby, got out and walked down the tracks to a nearby signal box telephone to find out what was going on. It was a trap. As Whitby was ambushed and overpowered, other members of the gang swarmed the driver's cab. Jack Mills put up a fight, but he was no match for the gang. He was brutally struck on the head with a heavy metal bar, an act of violence that would change his life forever. With the crew subdued, the next phase began. The plan was to uncouple the engine and the first two carriages, the HVP coaches, and drive them further down the track to a more accessible spot. But they hit a major snag. The man they had brought along to drive the train, an ex-train driver, couldn't operate this specific newer class of locomotive. It was too complex. Panic started to set in. Their perfectly timed plan was falling apart. So they made a ruthless decision. They dragged the injured and bleeding Jack Mills back into the cab and forced him to drive his own train to their designated spot, about half a mile further down the line at Bridego Bridge. Under the bridge, the rest of the gang was waiting with their getaway vehicles, including a couple of Land Rovers and an old army truck. What happened next was a frenzy of organized chaos. They formed a human chain, a line of men stretching from the train carriage to the trucks. One by one, they passed down 120 sacks filled with cash. In less than 30 minutes, they had loaded over 2.5 tons of money. The final haul was a staggering £2.6 million. In today's money, that's the equivalent of over £70 million. With the vehicles loaded, the gang vanished into the night, leaving behind a disabled train and 2 injured crew members. They were headed for Leatherslade Farm to count their fortune and celebrate. Back at the farm, the mood was ecstatic. They had pulled it off. The sheer amount of cash was overwhelming. They spread it out, dividing it into 15 equal shares of about £150,000 each, a life-changing sum for every man involved. In a moment that has since become legendary, they celebrated their victory by playing a game of Monopoly. But instead of using the colorful paper money from the box, they used real, stolen banknotes. Their plan was to stay hidden at the farm for a week, letting the initial police heat die down. But they got nervous. Police were swarming the area, conducting a massive search. The gang started to feel the pressure and decided to flee early, just a few days after the robbery. They hired a local accomplice to go back to the farm after they'd left, clean the place thoroughly, and then burn it to the ground, destroying all evidence. But this is where their luck ran out. The man they hired lost his nerve. He did a quick wipe down but never set the fire. When police, tipped off by a local herdsman, finally discovered the abandoned farm, they hit the jackpot. The gang, in their haste and overconfidence, had become sloppy. Inside, investigators found the Monopoly board. And on it, as well as on a ketchup bottle left in the kitchen, were fingerprints. Clear, undeniable fingerprints belonging to several members of the gang. This was the fatal mistake, the forensic key that unlocked the entire case. With the fingerprints as evidence, the police quickly identified the culprits. The net began to close. Within months, most of the gang were rounded up and arrested. In April 1964, the trial concluded. 11 of the robbers were found guilty, and the judge, wanting to make an example of them, handed down sentences that shocked the nation. The ringleaders, including Bruce Reynolds, were sentenced to 30 years in prison. The combined sentences for the group totaled over 300 years, some of the harshest penalties ever given, for a crime that didn't involve murder in the UK, but the story doesn't end there. For some, prison was just another obstacle to overcome. The most famous member of the gang, Ronnie Biggs, became a household name not for the robbery itself, but for what he did next. In 1965, just 15 months into his 30-year sentence, he escaped from Wandsworth Prison. He scaled the wall with a rope ladder and dropped onto a waiting removal van. Biggs then became one of the world's most famous fugitives. He underwent plastic surgery, got false papers, and fled to Australia with his family. When the police closed in on him there, he escaped again, this time to Brazil, which had no extradition treaty with the UK at the time. He lived openly in Rio de Janeiro for decades, becoming a sort of anti-establishment folk hero. He finally returned to the UK voluntarily in 2001 due to his failing health, and was sent back to prison. The mastermind, Bruce Reynolds, also managed to escape capture for 5 years. He fled with his family to Mexico and then Canada, living off his share of the loot. But the money eventually ran out. In 1968, he was finally caught back in Torquay, England, and sent to serve his sentence. The Great Train Robbery has been romanticized in books and movies for decades, often portrayed as a glamorous, victimless crime, but there was a real human cost. The train driver, Jack Mills, never worked again. The head injury he sustained during the attack caused him persistent, severe headaches. He passed away just 7 years later, in 1970. And his family has always maintained that he never truly recovered from the trauma of that night. The Great Train Robbery remains a landmark event in criminal history, a story of incredible audacity, meticulous planning, and one single fatal mistake. It's a tale that captured the public's imagination and has endured for over 60 years. If you want to see some of the original evidence, like the Monopoly board itself, you can visit the Postal Museum in London. You can also find more detailed records at the National Archives. It's a fascinating rabbit hole to go down. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into history's most incredible events. See you next time.